matter how good the technology, there's still feedback.
It's exciting. It's like a TV show. Live in 5. So, hello and welcome to the Heliosphere. To obviously the panel members, to the audience, and also to the online audience. My name is Kevin Coydle. I will briefly explain what this concept is, then allow the panel members to introduce themselves, and then we will move into the debate. The debate will take about 45 minutes, and the specific goal of that is to involve the citizens. So the panel members are all, in their own way, experts in the social media space, and we'll basically debate and motivate some of the topics that are at the moment debated in relation to social media. So the Heliosphere, specifically this concept, is designed to be a citizen thinking, which means that we are looking for citizens to voice their concerns and also their needs related to social media. And the way this sphere is designed, we have the inner circle with the panel members, and we have one hot chair here where anybody in the audience can join in at any time and ask questions or comments or share stories related to their experience with social media, their concerns, their needs with social media. And also what we have is people in the online audience that can comment or ask questions in the comment stream in the YouTube stream, and then Arthur over here will relay that back to the table where we can discuss the same topics. The sole purpose of this is the belief that this type of technology, social media as such, is much bigger and much more important now for society than we actually initially thought. So we have to make this a more democratic process. So the belief is that by involving the citizens of Europe, in this case, into the debate, that more meaningful social media technology can evolve. Hence the motivation is to make social media better in that sense, by debating what's not working, what's working well, what are the concerns and what are the needs. So I'll basically allow the panel members to briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll start.
Hello there, my name is Owen O'Dell. I'm a professor of law here in Trinity. I work on law and technology issues, and I blog about law and technology issues and tweet about law and technology issues at CEARTA, C-E-A-R-T-A, which is the Irish word for rights.
My name is Coleman Octor. I work as a child and adolescent psychotherapist, and I have a special interest, I suppose, in the impact of social media on mental health and emotional well-being. And I suppose from my clinical work with young people, it's a landscape changer in the last decade or so. So yeah, my interest comes from the clinical side, and I also teach here in Trinity half-time as well.
Hi, I'm Gillian Roddy. I am Programme Coordinator here in Tangent in Trinity's Ideas Workspace. We run an education suite full of programmes that run on innovation, creativity and entrepreneurship, and I am also an Instagrammer. I run an account called @ScienceSnapStories, which is based around science and formal education.
Thank you very much. My name is Kevin Coydle. I'm a researcher here in Trinity College in the ADAPT Centre. My specific research is in personalisation, which we now commonly call artificial intelligence, and my specific focus is on social technologies, which is technologies where people relate to each other, where relationships can be built, and very much the things that are happening in social media at the moment. There are a couple of European Union projects that relate to the Heliosphere that definitely are looking at the challenges that we're facing in social media, which I will mention during the debate. They're very much technology focused, so I'm a technologist. I'm coming from the technology side. But important for everybody here in the room and everybody in the panel, ultimately we're all citizens. Ultimately we're all members of a society which is often perceived as in danger by social media. And the question is, and it's often for me also as a scientist in this space, the question is, what is that danger and what is this confusion that social media is causing? And I would like to unravel that confusion a bit, because I personally think that even the designers up to a Mark Zuckerberg are confused themselves, seeing that this social media as it is now is so big and such a social experiment that nobody actually knows what's going on. So again, just for everybody in the audience, you can join this debate anytime on this hot seat, and don't be shy. Just come up, just join in, as if you're a panel member. You don't have to be an expert or anything like that. Again, we're all citizens, all on the same motivation, the same level of thinking and need. And also for the online audience, just add in any comments or any questions you have at any time. And Arthur over here, he will relay it back to the table, which I can then communicate. So maybe just to start this, just to crack this open, is it confusing? Like what does, maybe Gillian, if you want to start, is social media confusing? Is it confusing society? Is it confusing relationships? Or is this thing actually working and amazing?
There's a lot of questions in there. I mean,
Yes.
is it confusing? I'm still a little bit stuck actually on one of the previous
Yeah, go
statements
for
that
it.
you made,
Yeah.
that social media is a danger. That's a fairly loaded statement in and of itself.
Good.
I think that if we set out accepting that narrative, it's going to lead us down a very dangerous path in and of itself. And I'd argue that that's a very myopic way for us to approach this conversation, that if we do that we're accepting from the outset that social media is dangerous. And actually that in and of itself is something that we need to unpack, because my experiences, I am aware that there are dangers of social media, but my personal experiences of social media would be very far to the opposite side of the spectrum than that. So I can accept that social media can have dangerous facets to it, but to try and present social media as a dangerous entity is doing it a great injustice.
So maybe and I very much like that positive point of view. I would personally have a very neutral point of view, thinking that technology is not the driver or in any way the motivator of any of the challenges, good or bad. Technology for me is like a hammer, and it depends on how you use it. And for me, the social media technology is the same. But that's a very radical, technologically pointed fuel view. So maybe you can, based on your experience, which I think is very positive as well in terms of your following, maybe you can just share a story or experience how good it has been for you in your work and life in general.
Yeah, so I mean, there's been lots of different ways that social media has been a huge benefit to me, both professionally and personally. So I am part of that generation that sandwiched growing up. I was 18 when I got my first mobile phone. I was in my late 20s when social media became a thing. I think I was 27 when I opened up my first Facebook account. And I think that's something else that we need to be quite mindful of, is that our usage as people who've come into social media at a certain age in life is very, very different to the young people who are growing up with it as digital natives. So I went through very formative periods in my life where social media provided me with an opportunity to link in with other people that I would never have otherwise gotten to have. I met my husband through social media when I had both of my babies.
What app was it?
It wasn't actually an app, it was a forum. It was a very big Irish online forum, and still have many, many friends through that. I've been to multiple weddings of people who met through social media. Babies have been born through people who met from social media. When I had both of my babies and I was on maternity leave, I had an online community of like-minded people who I was able to talk to at 3 o'clock in the morning when no one else was awake. I was able to stave off loneliness and feelings of inadequacy by being able to link in with people who could share my isolation and my problems. Social media is very strange in that it can perpetuate very intimate relationships very, very quickly. In the absence of being able to talk to people in person and all of that non-verbal communication, in the absence of that, we seem to go at warp speed straight from I've never met you before into here are my deepest secrets and let's bond over that. And I think that certainly for my age group, as I've grown up through that, we've been able to navigate that with some success. But I would highlight that that's perhaps something that we need to be very mindful of with younger generations that don't have the life experience to be able to know the difference between online and real life communication. So I would argue then that my personal experiences have been overwhelmingly positive. Not all positive, of course. It would be completely remiss of me to try and pretend that social media is always amazing. And most recently through Instagram, it's given me an opportunity to take something that I'm passionate about and give my time to help other people get passionate about it. And again, meeting new people and like-minded people and hopefully inspire other people to go off and do their own great things.
Have you closed any social media accounts, and if so, why? And I'm
I
happy
have.
to say that I have closed my Facebook account. In fact, I've done it twice. And I don't think I'm going to go back and join a third time, not soon.
I also closed Facebook. Absolutely. I closed my Facebook account about a year ago, maybe, because it no longer served my interest, because I didn't trust it anymore as a website. I didn't trust
What
the
was
platform.
it that made you not trust it anymore?
I think, all social media that we use, the web is huge, it's absolutely massive, but we all inherently, when we use social media, we are both consciously and unconsciously curating our own experiences, both actively liking and sharing things that are of interest to us, and then of course the big bad evil algorithms that recognize this and provide content based on what we've actively chosen. So the social media that we see individually is very much to our own needs. And I found that with Facebook that it was giving me an incredibly skewed version of what I liked and enjoyed. And I found it very hard to trust what I was seeing.
So your just that I understand. So your trust would be very much pointing towards algorithms feeding you specific content in your newsfeed that might not be of interest or might be even difficult or not wanted.
That's a part of it, but I just felt that Facebook had, as a platform, had kind of lost itself a little bit, and also it's dying. It's not as active as it once was. It's largely people who have to be a little bit careful with what phraseology I use here, but it wouldn't be as active as other platforms that I would use.
Owen, maybe if you can share why you closed it. What was your thinking?
Well, I found that the algorithms were creepy in two ways. Sometimes they were creepily accurate, and sometimes they were creepily, fantastically inaccurate.
Yeah.
Sometimes they got my age, my gender, my interests absolutely spot on, and sometimes they just missed it completely. And that, in both cases, is a function of the data, not only the data that I've given, not only the data that my friends are giving about me, in terms of what they're including me in and liking and sharing about, but also all the third-party data that Facebook is purchasing and using to improve the user experience, and the amount of data that Facebook had to have and getting from third parties. First of all, it's all the information I've given elsewhere, and I've become much more careful about that. But secondly, it's what Facebook is getting in, and I found that when it was accurate, it was creepily accurate, and when it was inaccurate, it was frustrating. Yeah. And either way, I wasn't enjoying the experience.
Maybe comment if you want to add.
Yeah, I still have Facebook.
I am too. Yeah.
But I think there's I get your point about the narrative about it being all good or all bad. I think there's a community, in any community there's going to be diverse collections of people there, and the community will take on whatever the spirit of the community is, and your experiences of support and the peer support and that's one experience. There are other communities that would have quite the opposite in terms of persecution, etc. So I think to fall into the idea that technology is good or bad is a mistake. I think there's also a technological debate around, depends on whether you come from a rights or a responsibilities based issue, and a lot of the conversations around using and the use of the internet and social media gets conflated all the time, and having a smartphone gets conflated with that. They're all separate issues, but the issue is there's a group of people who are very rights based and say we are where we are, we need to just embrace the technology, be what we are, and then there's a kind of responsibility based issue that say prohibit and ban them and spare children the exposure. For me, it's both. Actually, you have to show a responsibility to earn a right in some respects, and I don't know whether that's built into that. In that you were saying that when you're a late adopter, you come to this at 27, 28. Whereas if you come to it at 3 or 4, are you going to have a completely different experience of that? And I think you are. And I think the rights and responsibilities are with the technology companies and the user. Yeah. And my issue here is we can regulate the internet and we can regulate technology to an inch of its life. Take all the creepy people off there and have it as clean as can be. You're still going to have 7-year-olds who are going to spend 9 hours watching cats on skateboards on YouTube. And that's not necessarily illegal or inappropriate, but it's the regulation of human desire that's actually really difficult as opposed to regulating the internet. And so for me, there has to be work on both. I think that's probably what
again, anybody who wants to join in, you don't even have to speak straight away. You can just sit there and come in whenever you think you want to. And we have someone online, I guess.
We have someone
Arthur is our online voice.
So, Kieran Devlin, thanks for your question. It pinpoints the importance to contextualize individual usage on social media. and he says that there is research, for example, that showed that teens in states used it to adapt to changing worlds to maintain their ties with one another. It's Boy 2014. And it helped represent these young people who have grown up with the tech, adapting themselves to broader societal shifts. But the topic as a whole of social media use and grappling with the various dimensions of social media and its impact on us as individuals and as a society is huge for critical assessment.
Well, I think that's the point that everybody has been making at the moment, which is that the technology itself is neutral. It depends on what we use it for. It depends on what others use it for vis-a-vis us. And if we look at every new technology, society has always treated new technologies with some degree of suspicion and over-regulated, or ignored them and under-regulated, and it takes time to get the balance right. So the first cars, they had to be no more than 3 miles an hour, and the person had to walk in front of them waving a red flag. That pretty much disappeared, and then it took a long time before we started getting things like speed limits and safety features and emission standards and so on. Similarly with cigarettes, initially no reaction at all, now significant over-regulation. What we're seeing with social media, with the internet in general, social media in particular, is exactly that society is taking its time to work out what the appropriate response can be, and we have either over-regulated or under-regulated at this point, and this is going to be a political argument as to which one it is, but we're still trying to come to grips with the technology, and I think we are probably going to get it about right, but not soon.
Thank you. Just maybe another question coming in online from Lawrence. Maybe one for you. I'll just read out the question directly. I would like to ask how social media is driving young users into addictive personality disorders by having to engage in social media. I don't know if that's a question you want to take, but
addiction is complex and loaded phrase. I mean, in terms of certain young people develop problematic relationships with social media? Absolutely, they do, and it comes down to the vulnerability of each user, and oftentimes it's the importance you place on things like the feedback that makes you vulnerable. So there's young people who will use technology, they'll use social media, and they'll engage it moderately, and they'll put it down and get on with their lives. There are other young people who are incredibly invested in the importance of it and overestimate these external validators, and it becomes a detriment to their own sense of self. And one of the things I would say is, for me, is an emotional and well-being experiment that a lot of young people, and I'm talking about mid-teens, really lack a sense of self. And so the external validator, or the voice of the other, which has always been a part of our identity, has become emphasized from the point of view of that currency of social value, the currency of emotional worth, has become it's at the hands of the mob to determine my value, and that's down to the vulnerability of the user, but it's also down to the design of the technology. Like, did we know when we were creating this that this might happen? So does it drive addiction? We know there are parts to the design of social media that really the only emphasis is time on screen. So they want us to spend more time on screen, and the development of certain apps that have a high regret scale, so the more time you spend on it and go, oh my god, I spent 2 hours on this today and I should have only spent 1 hour, is a sign of the success of the design of the app, the higher the regret scale. So we know that social media the allure of it is part of the design. Are young people falling foul of that? Completely. And I think the weapons of mass distraction that technology can oftentimes have they're having pervasive effects on our own ability to be alone, to be with ourselves, to develop. Take, for example, in mental health, one of the greatest kind of things at the moment is mindfulness. I don't think we could have solved mindfulness in the 80s. I think it's because of the mindlessness of society, and the design of these technologies is to encourage mindlessness, to not encourage reflection, to not encourage a thoughtfulness or whatever it might be.
Could I ask a follow-up then? How much of this is a function of social media versus the addicted users, and how much of this is, if it wasn't social media, it would be something else that the addicted users would be addicted to?
Yeah, and that's the pro-tech argument that I always get, is how do you...
No, well, I'm not making an argument, I'm asking a question.
But I think people will say, how do you know the internet is causing all of these emotional difficulties? Because we've never had more demand for mental health services, and is it directly related to technology? Well, that research will never come, because we're never going to be able to just isolate the relationship between well-being and technology, because either we have to expose a group of children to cyberbullying, pornography, unlimited use, and then see if there's a problem or not. Because we've also been through an economic recession, we've also seen the fall of Catholicism in our country, we've also seen these kind of socio-cultural changes and shifts that could account for all of this. But from the point of view, so the cause and effect is not clear, nor may it ever be clear. But do we wait for the evidence that may never come, or do we think about ways in which we can better instigate some sort of regulation or direction or support to the technology to manage it? I don't know. I'm thinking if we wait, it may be too late. That would be my fear.
And just to give young people, and I'm always very conscious of the young people's voice in this, not that I am in any way the voice of young people, but that we have to give credit where credit is due, and we are seeing the research is emerging around generation gaps, that Generation Z, that is those who were born since the millennium, there are huge lessons being learned there, that they are seeing their millennial seniors, perhaps the mistakes that they made when social media exploded. The Generation Zers are being more cognizant of what they put online, their privacy is significantly better, they're better at navigating, and they're also emerging as the most socially conscientious group of people. They're much more aware of societal issues because they've had no choice. They're bombarded with news.
Can you just repeat what Generation Z is?
Sorry, so Generation Z is technically it's people born since 1997, but largely people who were born from the millennium onwards. We don't know when that'll end yet, but it's a big group. But they are emerging as a group of young people who are learning a lot of lessons, and so again, we just have to be careful not to sway all young people with one big thought, that they are learning very, very quickly and adapting.
Just getting back to your point about trust and the authenticity of that, I mean, the conscientiousness and the socio-cultural issues, we have to be aware that social media encourages an altruistic narcissism. So from the point of view of me taking a picture of me giving a homeless guy €1 and putting it up on Instagram is about me placating my own thoughtfulness, as opposed, now the homeless guy gets €1 out of it, but the authenticity of, in my research when I looked at it, there was lots of social cultural warriors, but when I interviewed the people, the depth of connection to those causes was very limited. It was much more announcing my identity of who I believe I want to be, as opposed to actually who I am. And so we need to kind of to look at that a little bit from that point of view.
That is true, and that's the more and more that generation believe that it's the government's job as opposed to anybody else to fix all of the problems, whereas the older we get, the more we believe that it's an individual's responsibility. So that absolutely ties in with that.
But is it then not, if this argument, this orchestrated self, or this dramaturgical self as it's often called, that you can create different masks, personas we call them in research, for your life, and you project a certain coolness, let's say, the great life you have, or whatever it is, and there's a lot of very creative and very successful narratives of creating personas, but in essence these let's call them, they're not deliberately fake, but let's say these not completely authentic, almost acted personas online, do they not, well, they basically lead to this distraction in what content gets fed, what behavior the platform shows. So are we not, and this is like again a very radical technology point of view, are we not creating the beast ourselves? Or is it the technology and the algorithms? But it seems very much that if we create a fake persona, let's just call it fake, maybe inauthentic is better, but let's say we do that, do we then not create those problems ourselves? And maybe why do we do that? Do we do that out of lack of knowledge, or do we do that out of...
Most people don't develop fake personas. They develop hoped for self.
Maybe that's a better word.
So
yeah,
it's
I don't like the word fake. I just didn't know what to use.
So you're striving for that hoped for self. And the bigger the gap between the hoped for self and what we know is the real self is the potential for unhappiness. So the expectation minus reality equals happiness is still very clear. But in social media we drive expectations, and we drive the need for the hoped for self to be even more impressive than the next. And that does bring up elements of trust in terms of, can I trust what I see? Can I trust what you say? And look at my husband gave me in a picture of flowers, and you just saw them arguing in the street 10 minutes beforehand. And so it does call into question, I suppose, as what you said at the start about the authenticity of human relationships. And does social media impact on our capacity to trust each other? I think it is, but I think technology does anyway. I've had conversations with colleagues, and I get into my room and it says, further to the conversation we just had in the corridor, you committed to doing blah blah blah. So the whole trust that I will do it, I have electronic record that I now have you capable.
But in a way you could then argue that social media is making us better humans, better members of society, because it's basically a technology that allows us to project a better of ourselves and then possibly alter our lives towards that. So there shouldn't be that much dislike about it if it actually...
If the projection is closely resembles my actual real life, well then there's a potential for that to be really good, because it's about...
But maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's like projecting what I would like to be, and I'm not that, and I'm trying to change my life towards that. But I'm already projecting it as like a life goal or something.
But not if the projector is somebody of influence and it's all of the people who look to them as an influencer, then it's a completely unobtainable projection. And that's where I think that and certainly the research that's coming out, and I think this is the really interesting thing about research around social media, is it is so difficult to research because the goalposts are changing so fast. And it was interesting to hear Owen, you talking about the regulation of this technology, and it's going to be this endless struggle, because by the time we've all sat down around a table to talk about technology, the real world has moved on in ways that we can't.
We're regulating yesterday's problems.
Absolutely.
We're fighting last year's battles. We're not actually seeing the problems in front of us right now.
Absolutely.
And the internet is amplifying that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And actually, I think we were talking about trust. We were trying... by using the word amplifying, I'm now having a thought: is amplification the unique issue of social media? That there may always be personal issues, there may always be personal problems, there may always be people who disagree with me, there may always be people that I aspire to be, but the unique difference that the internet, that technology has brought, is that it has amplified that significantly, and that what we need to be focusing on is not necessarily the individual issues, but the fact that social media amplifies in very, very large ways, and it's the amplification rather than the issue that is the real problem.
And again, that can be neutral, that can be both a positive and a negative.
Yep.
I think amplification is an issue. I think bullying has been there since time immemorial, but now it's on a greater scale. But there's also something about the community or the culture that social media suggests, which is very gratification based, very outcome based, it's very focused on end result. So if we take, say for example, emotional expression, and we have this feeling out there now that everyone needs to express their emotions, and we've posters on the wall saying talk to someone, and that's the way forward. But emotional expression needs to be accompanied by emotional intelligence. If you don't have emotional intelligence, you just have emotional expression, you have Twitter. You know what I mean? From the point of view of people just shouting what they feel. And sometimes the labour-intensive stuff, like gratification is one thing, but fulfilment is another thing. And fulfillment isn't something that's instant. And the narrative around social media is about the quick hit. It is about getting a result, getting a reaction instantaneously. It's maybe not about the more laboursome parts of emotional well-being, which I think are far more labour-intensive.
I would... Sorry.
No, but I think it's an excellent point. But again, it would feedback that it does open up this Pandora's box. Where are young people not having their emotional intelligence, or how are they not having their emotional intelligence developed in other ways?
Because of the time spent with the self, which is the time you spend on your own, the time you spend working something out. If you don't have a moment the most important relationship you'll ever have in your life is the one you have with yourself. But that needs to be invested upon. You need time to spend time with yourself to know who you are. And if everything is so externally kind of gratified and everything's outside of yourself, then you'll find that you won't develop that, and when adversity
Absolutely.
strikes, it's not there to kind of be leaned upon. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely it does. But it's. I wonder how is it that avenue is is available to young people? Like, how is it that they're getting it's a big question. How is it that are these young people who don't have support systems already in their life, or they're these are places that school or parents or peers or other people would normally provide.
Yeah, but I think the limitation of our youth is important here, because I grew up with an older sister who I know if she had any other option to spend time with her friends, she would have spent every time there and not with us, right? But that wasn't possible because my parents regulated, so she was forced to spend time with us. But young people now don't have to. There is a capacity to be elsewhere, and they oftentimes are where they want as opposed to where they need to be. And it's the want and need. And for me, the ethical design of online social media is that it gives us what we want and never gives us what we need. So no one on social media is going to say, Kevin, you've had enough of that now, take a step back. It's going to
I hope your sister is listening and
send
something
I would
in
like
on the commentary.
I would like to kind of pick up on where the debate is going, which is more what do we need to do to make it better, and there's a nice spread of different opinions. But again, I'm inviting the public to both online if there's any more questions, but also here in the space to just join in, even if it's just for a few minutes with a question or anything. Don't be shy at all. We're all citizens. We're all looking at the same thing. So in terms of what might help, what has to be done. So I basically just start. Me as a technologist, as a scientist, so with my colleague Owen here also in the audience, we're working on 2 European Union projects, one Helios, one Provenance, and we're specifically looking at how can technology be redesigned to facilitate more trustworthy interactions on social media. Provenance looking more at content and basically battling the issue of fake news based on making sure that the content is not altered or changed after it has been posted from the source. And technology is very good in making those checkpoints. And Helios is a technology or a project that is looking at creating new ways of social graphs. So instead of having one big social graph, let's have different social graphs and let's have them change dynamically based on the context we're in. So a little bit the way our brain creates social graphs and constantly assesses them on trust. So I'm very much a technologist saying, a lot of the stuff you're talking about can maybe be changed if we change a bit the design of the technology, we think it. But it'd be nice.
How do we achieve those design changes, given that there's a significant path dependency? Facebook has a structure, Twitter has a structure, Instagram has a structure.
Absolutely.
Those structures are very profitable from the point of view of the companies.
Yes.
What you're talking about is doing things in a completely different way. How do you encourage, or more, those different ways into the mainstream?
Yeah, I guess part of this is to really understand what the fundamental issues are, and really understanding how we can change those. So I think there's a strong movement to be more to answer that more direct. There's a very strong movement, and Facebook is seeing that too, in going into smaller communities. We see that how WhatsApp works. So WhatsApp is totally taken off with WhatsApp groups and more intimate, more smaller controlled groups, assuming that that's implicit trust. Because if you have a group with 50 people and you know them more or less by name, nobody should be posting stuff or forwarding stuff that is somehow mischief or in a bad way. Obviously that still happens, but just by making those groups smaller. And I was listening to an interview yesterday with some Facebook designers. They're getting rid of the news feed. Like, Facebook is going totally into chat. So we won't be going into Facebook and seeing a newsfeed anymore. It'll be all through Messenger and all intimate small groups with group leaders taking responsibility and so forth. So there's a very strong design trend in technology to move away from these big platforms into smaller groups. And I think that's an opportunity then for scientists and technologies like myself to create more platforms or more means of technology that support the creation of smaller apps in different use cases and different needs. It's all very much at the beginning, so I can't directly say what challenges, like we definitely have identified most of the challenges we think, but new ones are coming up all the time, and especially challenges you're facing, like regulation, that's a big one. The human side, that's a massive one, which goes into education and these aspects, which I'd love to hear about, and your point of view in saying that social media is actually, the way it is actually quite good as well. Like, there's parts of it that should maintain the way it is. But it's just a fascinating time now, because I think I think there's so much, again, like what I said at the beginning, there's so much confusion about it and so many people trying to solve it. But I, even as a scientist, sometimes think what are the specific points of confusion that I first have to deeply understand to actually come up with solutions. And there's now the great opportunity to do so, because even the big platforms like Facebook are radically redesigning. So it's like an opening to say, okay, there is a need for new approaches, but what exactly is that need? Like you said, like if I ask a user what is the need, the user will say what they want, but not exactly what they need. So that's part of this debate as well, to work this out.
From the perspective of regulation, there are two things that the Irish government is working on at the moment, and they're not the only government trying to work on these issues, but work is advanced on two things that I think need to be considered. One is the Internet Safety Commissioner, and the other is on transparency of political advertising. The reason for the Internet Safety Commissioner, but it won't be the only focus of the work of the office if and when it comes into effect, is to protect young people from the dangers of the internet. That's the idea behind it. It's the character in The Simpsons, the Reverend's wife. Will no one please think of the children? Linda Lovejoy. No. Reverend Lovejoy's wife, I can't remember her name, but that was her catchphrase, will no one please think of the children. So that's a good idea. We need a certain degree of protection for children online, but the problem is that we can way too easily over-regulate as a consequence. Yeah. Similarly, we can look back at Brexit, we can look back at the last American election, we can look forward to the fact that there will be elections at the end of May, local and European elections, and if Brexit isn't about to happen, we might even have a general election here. There is talk in government circles, or hope in government circles, that the regulation or the transparency of online advertising, paid for political advertising on the public platforms, should be more developed by that stage. But again, it's very easy to over-regulate just because you are distrustful of the message. That may be because you're a politician and you don't like the criticism. So it's very easy to say, yes, we need to deal with fake news, especially fake political advertising, or we need to think of the children online. But then if we create a really significant heavy-duty regulatory structure, it can be very heavy-handed and can throw out the baby with the bathwater.
I'll always come at these discussions from an educator point of view, because that's usually the sphere that I'm looking at these things in. And I think that it's interesting to hear the phrase "protect the children." My take on it would be, let's empower the children, and that across the board, whether we're talking about kids, adolescents, adults, and beyond, the digital era and digital technologies and the agility of the technology that we see now is. The one commonality that we have throughout the generations is this progressive loss of transferable and soft skills. So for the adults amongst us, that means creativity, problem solving, critical analysis and critical skills. But those are the same soft skills that kids are learning or should be learning in school, both in informal and formal learning through their parents as education brokers. And we've lost, as a parent and as part of that community, I think that we have lost the confidence to give that to our kids and to help our kids to navigate that. So I would be constantly looking at what are the mechanisms that we have for empowering not just children, but also for everybody to be able to navigate the world of online technologies, in addition to the regulation that the government or whoever it is imposes, but that we need to be able to safeguard ourselves and each other, and that there's lots of different ways of coming at that, because I'm skeptical as to whether or not the technology really can be modified to the extent that you're talking about. And if that doesn't happen, then we need to be our own best saviours and be able to navigate that for ourselves.
But then you're pointing to, so you're saying that we need to basically create more space for education of the fundamentals of social media or these technologies. So basically, if new apps pop up and new approaches and new stuff constantly comes up, such as apps that are completely anonymous and so forth, that the next generation can better deal with this then? Or?
I don't think necessarily it means making more space, and I think that's what the argument around the loss of transferable and soft skills is that the education systems that we have right now, arguably, the didactic system needs to be massively overhauled. And we are seeing at different levels. We're seeing it in primary schools to a large extent. The junior cycle overhaul, then here in Trinity with the Trinity Education Project. we're looking at how do we better develop young people's skills, not just in that two-way formal system, but also how do we develop their problem-solving skills, their critical analysis, all of those bits and pieces that can apply both to their school and college work, but also to their everyday lives. And that's, I was reading a report the other day that was talking about Generation Z again, and over 50% of them in the last 3 months hadn't been into a bank. These everyday, tiny, micro interactions that we take for granted. That interaction, the non-verbal and the verbal communication skills that we develop as we grow up without the internet, that's getting lost. So how do we reintroduce that? How do we overhaul education to help empower young people?
I just have a quick story to support that. The Alexa device, basically the speech device that is in a lot of living rooms and kitchens. Like my cousin has one and he has 3 small kids, and the Alexa device is on the table, and basically the kids talk with the Alexa device, such as Alexa, set timer, Alexa, what's the capital of Finland? And there's no please, there's no thank you, there's none of this. And what struck me then was I was away on holidays with a few friends, and one of them is in his late 50s, and I kind of showed him Google Now to talk to his phone, and he was like, okay, Google, and then he asked a question like, what's the capital of Finland? I said, okay, thank you very much. See you then. See you. Bye bye now. But there is a communication change potentially if we take social technologies, not just being social media, but also all the interaction devices, all the things we touch, everything that speaks to us. And there seems to be a change because it's a command and response interface. But politeness goes out of the window. So I'm not sure if Generation Z or the babies, whatever we call them, will walk around and talk to people the same way to machines, or will it merge?
That is a change. It isn't necessarily a bad thing. If you count back, the Walkman. I'm old enough to have had an original Walkman. So the first personal music device, the first set of headphones, that sort of killed conversation on trains, and the television, that sort of killed conversation at home, and the radio, well, that just killed social life in general. And the cinema, well, you weren't engaging with people anymore. You were all sitting there watching the same thing on the screen and ignoring life. And before that, novels. They were destroying the minds of the women who were reading them, and they were absolutely awful. And we now think novels are good things, and the cinema is a very good, and the television isn't so bad, and actually listening to our music is a good thing without having to consume somebody else's. So there are changes, and because we are seeing changes, we can automatically think, change is a bad idea. But it's only change. We need to be careful not to confuse change with change for bad, to assume that it's
absolutely
bad.
Yes.
And so a lot of the things we've been talking about are changes, and it may be that there's an awful lot of false civility, thank you very much, and that the straightforward, what's the capital of Finland, well, I don't know, is more than enough.
Yeah, I think there's some absolute truth to that, and we can't go into the moral panic side of things, but there are kind of core, I think, communication skills, and in the research that I was doing, I remember one of the candidates said I would exhaustively search a website for an email address rather than make a phone call to see if there's a job because of that. I think the Tinderization of culture is really important in terms of our view of intimacy and engaging in relationship and that sort of stuff. I would worry more pervasively than perhaps books or TV, because I think they were moderated, censored material, whereas this is a much more pervasive interactive space, and just from a children's point of view I would worry about that. But I think your point about media literacy and developing those skills key to where we need to go forward, but also to build in the emotional skills in that we almost have to prescribe time. Like I would say the Department of Education should save themselves a fortune. Just bring in a boredom class into primary school. So for 40 minutes a week, you just sit with your own thoughts and with no distractions and see how.
I don't think they need to do that. There's always the teacher that you're never listening to, and that's when you're sitting with your own thoughts.
But you know what the problem?
And hopefully, for my students, it's not me.
But you know what the problem would be, Owen? If you brought that in, you'd have parents rampaging up to the door and saying, they're not going to get any leaving cert points for a boredom class. I want it out. Yeah. And it's our cultural demand that you've Montessori kids going, my kid can't count to 10. Why can't? And so there's these impacts that go all the way down. Do you know what I mean? And I would see myself on social media creating that pressure as well. I'm looking at my friends' kids and they're 7. They've got black belts in taekwondo, and my kid's 8 and can't tie his shoelaces. And I'm looking at him going, why can't you tie your shoelaces?
So not only do we want something from your sister, we want something from your kid as well. And,
but the pressure, and I think that we need to have a counter indication of that. The other thing I'd say is, if we try...
What is the counter indication?
Well, it's not a walled garden, and I can guarantee you that. the allure of the internet is that it's a parent-free space, that it is unregulated, that's why we want to be there. There are numerous companies have tried to set up these kids' social networks that are safe, and that nobody's ever bought into them because it defies the purpose of the experiment, which
they last about 18 months and then disappear.
And so I think if we take away the allure, then we are left with a kind of a stale issue, and I think it'll probably there'll be always these kind of pop-ups that will create.
And then what's the middle
path?
Missing? Instead of taking it away, or the way it is, what is a potential in your mind?
I don't think. I think it's always in the human. I think we try and make the difference rather than trying to change the technology. We try and change the human. Trying to teach children to regulate desire, to delay gratification. This is a labour-intensive, difficult task, and everyone wants the 5 steps to teaching your child to be online. It doesn't exist. You don't introduce your child to technology. Your child is introduced to the home that has technology all around them. It's really difficult. It's really challenging, but it's what the work is. And I think if we're looking for a quick fix, I don't think it is there. I think this is complex. I think this takes space, and I also think sometimes we need to explore the middle. I think sometimes our culture, we exist in 1, 2, 3, 8, 9, 10, and there's a whole 4 to 7 there that is not. It's not sexy. It doesn't get headlines. It's the
Goldilocks zone. It's not too fast, not too slow, not too hot, not too cold. But just right in the middle.
But how do we sell the middle? And that's my question.
Well, that's basically why we're doing this. We're trying to find the middle. Like one of the reasons why this is set up, the Heliosphere, is to find that, to debate that.
Well, I'm not sure that we'll necessarily find it, but I think the process is important. We've talked about some technological solutions, we've talked about some social solutions, we've talked about some interpersonal solutions, we've talked about some educational solutions, we've talked about some legal solutions. For so long as we are trying to identify the issues and deal with them, those of us around the table, those of us in this room, those of us online, the more that does that, the better. The problem is a problem only if we ignore it. Only if we just let tech go in whatever way it wants to go, or desire to go in whichever way it wants to go. But if we are conscious of issues and engaging with the issues, we will be in a better place. We won't necessarily get all of the solutions right, but we won't underdo it, and hopefully we won't overdo it either. And the fact of trying will be reaching the Goldilocks zone.
So I'm just conscious of time. You mentioned you have to leave a little bit earlier.
I do, yeah.
Also, if there's, you don't have to sit here. Is there a question from the audience? Is there any, without sitting down, just from.
Was your question?
Yeah. And then I don't know. Yeah.
It's an odd question maybe, but you mentioned a 40-minute boredom class. Do you think there is a unit of like the minimal amount of time that you would need to basically give to yourself as a young adolescent?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I think you're asking what is there a prescription of time that we need to invest in? I would think 20-40 minutes a day minimum. And I just think about...
Isn't that your mindfulness thing, though? Taking 20 or 40 minutes for yourself to be alone with your thoughts and to get to know yourself.
And I don't want to diss mindfulness. It's a lot more than that, and it's not just about... But it's prescribing time. But because culture is what it is, we have to prescribe time. Like, when I got home from school, I used to get a bus. I got off the bus, I rang 3 times, and it was 15 minutes waiting for my mum to collect me. I was 15 or 16 years of age. It was me, a bag of books on a wall. Now, there was no way I was reading the books. So that was the time that you thought about, who am I? What do I want to be? What would I like to do?
Solitude.
Without that space. And it is a real investment in that relationship of knowing who I am. And we're very much focused on, I have parents saying, I want my child to be more confident. Confidence is great, but confidence is how you project yourself outwardly. What you want is your self-esteem, your self-worth, and that direction inwards. And nothing that we have at the moment in culture directs in. It all directs out. It's all ego-based. And I've had loads of confident kids with medals, plaques, accolades, thousands of followers who sit in front of me wanting to end their lives. So from the point of view of, we need to invest in what is the nourishing pieces of ourselves, and we need to actually create a counterculture that values that, rather than that outward-facing part, which is absolutely important and nice, but it isn't, for me, as nourishing as that inward relationship. And I think it's creating pockets of time for that to be able to emerge or evolve is really important.
Thank you.
It's a question about guidance. So I'm just wondering if we've lost our guides. Before social media, our parents, our family, our immediate peers, could see their journey and you have people to guide you. Now that guidance was often, no, you're not going to that disco, you're grounded, whatever, and there's a very physical element to it. And because of the Wild West nature of social media, our guides are lost.
Yeah.
And consequently we all get lost.
Just repeat the question.
You're just asking about our guides and have we lost our kind of wisdom?
Yeah.
This is the first time we've lived in a prefigurative society where the young are teaching the old. And normally we hand something down with experience and wisdom. Now we're handing it up with capacity and how it can work. And it creates an infancy or an infantile way of engaging with the technology because it's handed up as opposed to handed down. And I think it's not accompanied with the experience of having used it sensibly or maturely. It's just what it can do.
We will learn from that.
Wouldn't be influencers, the term influencers in social media, wouldn't that be guides? There would be term as influencers.
Oh yeah, with questionable guides, but your guides nonetheless, yeah, for sure.
I wouldn't necessarily say that the previous guides were any more or less questionable. They were fallible, they were human, and we're replacing one with another. We will make mistakes, we will hopefully learn from the mistakes. Again, we're seeing change happen, transitions happen before our eyes. The mere fact that it's change isn't necessarily a bad thing. We are replacing one set of guides with another. Owen's question was, well, is it... we understood where those guides were, but that doesn't necessarily mean to say they were right. They were just proximate. Now they are more remote, but that's the only difference. They're still human. They're still fallible. We will learn judgment. We will learn trust. We're in the process of doing so. We haven't got there yet, but we're certainly trying.
Do you want to?
Just very quickly, I think also to speak to that question, I think that we, perhaps in this generation, who are the parents of the young people trying to navigate, that we've lost our confidence in our ability to be guides. That because we're lacking it ahead of us, we've forgotten the role that we play as guides to younger people as well. And that, again, this is a flip side of social media, that there's so many mixed messaging around what parenting is and isn't, that we're just bombarded. We're constantly looking outward as opposed to being able to look at ourselves as parents and go, I'm doing okay, and that my kids are going to be fine. We can't be our own best advocate anymore.
Yeah, lovely. I guess we'll close it now, just looking at time and also batteries. I would like to thank panel members, Gillian, Coleman and Owen, for coming here today. I would very much like to thank everybody who came here into the space, even if nobody was brave enough to sit up. We'll do it again. And I do hope this helps the debate and helps shape the debate and ultimately helps us create better social media futures. I won't say technology, but generally that we learn to deal with this in a much more positive and useful manner. Ultimately, I'm hearing it's more about relationships to ourselves and relationships to others. It's actually not about technology. It's more we've been almost like reminded by this technology that there's a lot going on we have to figure out ourselves. So that concludes the Heliosphere. Also thank you to the audience online, especially Kieran and Lawrence for questions and comments and coming in on the chat. We're going to do this again. So the Heliosphere website is live, heliosphere.social. There you can debate and add comments and see where next events are. We're not just doing the citizen think-ins, we're also doing one-on-ones and thought leader conversations, and all with that same motivation to figure out what this middle is or try to feel what the middle is, and as I said, create a more meaningful social media future. So thank you very much, and see you the next time.
Thanks. Cheers.